Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessikah. I am here today with an author who wrote a really twisty book called Look Closer. Would you like to tell everyone who you are?
Hi, I'm Dave Ellis, and Jessikah, thank you for having me. My name is Dave Ellis. I'm from Chicago. I am by day a judge on the Illinois Appellate Court, and by night and early morning, I'm a novelist. And so, yeah, Look Closer, I think, is book number 20 for me, but it's the first one I've written alone in probably about 7 or 8 years.
So how did it come about that this is the first time you're writing alone in a while then?
Well, so I've been writing with James Patterson, co-writing with him for some time now. I think it probably goes back about 12 years now. And, sometime around 2014, I was elected to the bench. I became a judge, and I have young kids, and I was writing with Jim. And I got to a point where I was having a little bit of a creative difference, I guess, with my publisher. It was friendly, it was respectful, but we had a bit of a disagreement over a book. And I didn't do anything dramatic, like, formally, like, rip up a contract or anything like that. But I thought, well, you know what, I'm gonna take a break and think about what my next step is with my publisher. And that break ended up lasting 7 years. It's really only because of all the things going on in my life otherwise. And then when the pandemic hit, and my wife had been telling me, and so had Patterson, by the way, Jim has always encouraged me to go back to writing my own books. He likes them, and he's been great about it. And my wife has always said, find the time to write your own book. And I just said, when? And the pandemic was the time. There's almost nothing good to say about the pandemic, but if there's one good thing that came out of it for me, out of many bad things, it was that I had a little bit of extra time. And so I set off to write the book that I've wanted to write for quite a long time, and that is Look Closer.
This was a really interesting book, and I'm still sort of trying to go back in my mind and look closer to see how I could have missed the things that eventually happen. So this is the story of a lot of people, but the central characters are Simon and Vicky.
Yes.
And Simon is involved in an affair with a woman named Lauren, who you come to learn he knew a long time ago,
Yes.
and he had been enamored with. And Vicky has some crazy secrets as well, but she and Simon definitely have a connection, and that they're keeping from each other. From the outside, as the blurb says, it looks like they're a normal couple with a typically possibly boring marriage, but there's just so much more going on, and it was a real twister for me.
Yeah, well, it was a lot. Thank you, Jessica. It was fun to write, but I like hearing things like that. When I read the reviews, I've gotten some reviews professional and some just from Goodreads or Instagram and Amazon. And one thing I'm reading a lot in the reviews is they're saying, what the hell just happened? What did I just read? And many of them have said, I'm not going to try to describe the plot to you at all. Go in blind, because anything I tell you is only going to be partly true. And I really wanted to do that with this book. I decided that I wanted to write. I hope all of my books are fun in their different ways, but I really wanted this to be a fun game for the reader to think, okay, I'm digging into these characters. I think I get them. And then you don't get them because they've got something else going on that you didn't expect. And sometimes I even surprised myself while I was writing. Not all of the things that I did in the book were planned ahead of time. Some of it comes organically as you're writing. I always call that surprising myself. I will surprise myself sometimes when writing and say, hey, wait a second, what about this? And then I'll have to go back and make some changes to accommodate that. And, the result is, literally nothing is what it seems in the book. And as the book progresses, I've again, kind of mimicking some of the reviews I've read, there's, 4 or 5 holy cow moments, like, you're kidding me. And at least that's what I'm shooting for. So that's why I was happy to hear you say that, Jessica. I mean, that's the goal. When I think of these books, this is a murder mystery, it's suspense, it's a psychological thriller, domestic suspense, whatever term you want to use. When you're reading these kinds of books, I think of it as a game. And it's a game willingly entered into between reader and author. And I'm trying to manipulate some information to fool you, and you're trying to guess. That's what I do when I read. I try to figure it out, and I often do figure it out. I have not read any or heard from anybody yet who said they figured it out. And that makes it fun. That's why I think it's such a fun book.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of struck me and I thought was interesting was like Simon has like this really interesting way, like this really interesting voice. And I wasn't really sure like if I was how I was reading it. I was like, is this sort of a personality quirk? Is this like something else, something maybe, just I don't know how else to say it. Like I couldn't tell if this was like a psychological thing or if this was just like a quirk of the way that he spoke or he thought. You find out later that he had some unfortunate bullying situations in his past. How did his voice come to you?
Well, over a long period of time. And this book reminds me a lot of the first book I wrote, which was Line of Vision, before I had any deadlines, before anybody knew who I was. And the character in that book lived in my brain for several years as I started to, slowly write my first book. And the similarity, I guess, is that I had taken some time off. And so, my publisher was hoping I was going to write another book, but they didn't necessarily know when or if even. And so that gave me time to marinate over Simon. Simon was the first character I came up with. And then I came up with Vicky. And in some ways, Vicky is the strongest character in the book. In fact, I think she probably is. People ask me who's the hero of the book. I say Vicky. Vicky and Jane, the 2 main female characters, are the heroes, not the men. But Simon, what I try to do with people is I try to dig as deep as I can, because it's very easy to write a likable character, someone who rescues drowning puppies and who, always does good things. And those are fun books to read, but that's not what I like to read. I like to read people who are flawed. And I think even the nicest people I've ever known, have dark thoughts and maybe things that they would never say out loud. I can think of somebody who I know who is a wonderful person, but who always remembers everybody who disrespected them. And I'm like that too. I always kind of remember my grudges. The joke is it's Irish Alzheimer's. You only remember the grudges. And I have a little bit of that in me, even though I think I'm a pretty nice guy. And I thought that would be interesting with Simon. And that's a pretty good way to describe Simon. It's probably not, you're probably not able to describe Simon in one sentence, but if you had to, you might say he's someone who remembers his grudges, including bullies, including people who've done him wrong. And I thought that was a really human quality. I really was excited about putting that in a character because I haven't seen that very much. And that's the way people really are. I mean, I think these characters came to life. I was very happy about how much they came to life. I don't think any character in this book is all good, and I don't think any of the characters are all bad. Not even one who you would probably think is clearly bad. I don't think he's all bad.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So
he's pretty bad, but
yeah, he's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty bad.
Yeah.
So as like a justice, is it weird to write about crime fiction? Like, do you can't write about something that actually is happening in front of you.
Right.
That's got to be like take a lot of restraint. So like, do crimes just like happen in your head and you're just like, I need to write about that?
It's funny. I mean, I became a justice in 2014, and I've been writing books since really just before the year 2000. So luckily I already had that under my belt. It's never felt weird to me. I've never written about a real case in front of me. I've gotten an occasional idea. One of the things that's in this book is cell phone technology and how you can track people. And I've had cases dealing with that. And I was able to educate myself somewhat because I had trial transcripts. I'm on the Court of Appeals, so I get transcripts from the trial. And I was able to educate myself a little bit based on a couple cases I've worked on, but generally speaking, I really don't borrow hardly anything from what I actually see. There's, really the most interesting crimes to write about are the ones that you invent in your head. At least I find. But the future is what it is. I mean, I certainly reserve the right to get a really good idea from a really cool case. I get every crime, I get every criminal and civil appeal out of Chicago. That's my jurisdiction. Is the first district appellate court is Cook County, and Cook County is mostly Chicago. So I get them all. I get some really, really rough criminal stuff, and I get corruption cases, double, triple murders. I mean, you get the whole shebang. So there's a lot to work with.
So this particular crime that takes place, and it's not a spoiler to say that things don't really end up well for Lauren, who
Right.
is the woman who Simon is having an affair with, and she's not a stellar person either, but
No.
who is. And I agree with you, by the way, that Vicky is the best character in the book. She's really wow, I really liked her. But so this was an affluent neighborhood that this crime took place in, and that the crimes are taking place in. Could you talk a little bit about just the suburbia of Look Closer?
Yeah, so I live in a suburb outside of Chicago, and I didn't want to write about the suburb I live in. I didn't want to write about any actual suburb, but I wanted to write about a suburb. And yes, Grace Village is an affluent town, just west of Chicago. And I really liked the idea of a suburban setting. The book is set plenty in the city of Chicago as well, but the crime is in a suburb. For one thing, then you're talking about a small town police force, and I wanted a police officer in a small town who'd never investigated a murder. In fact, the town had never had a murder. So this was a town where they're not accustomed to very much violent crime at all. And when it happens, that's part of the book too, is the reaction of the town to this and the pressure they put on the police. I also thought one of the fun things about Jane Burke, who is the police detective investigating, is she's underestimated in every way. She's underestimated because she's a woman. She's underestimated because she's in a small town. And in fact, she ends up being, I'd say, quite brilliant and quite intuitive, and not accepting the easy answer when everybody else wants her to. And it becomes a formidable, I think, competition between her and somebody in the book who she believes is the killer. I really enjoyed how that played out and how she had to fight through so many things, because I think that is something that women generally have to fight through, and I think female police officers very much have to fight through.
Would you like to write about her again?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would. I haven't yet. The next book, I've just finished my second book since I've kind of come back. It's really like my 21st book, but that book has all new characters. But we talked about it. We thought, well, should we do another Simon book, which might be hard to do? And my agent actually said, I really like Jane. Can you have her, deal with another crime? And so I could easily see that coming back, because she's really a strong character. I really enjoyed her.
Yeah, I did too. And I mean, again, I know, like, to see like Vicky again would kind of, it would be too much, or I see what you're saying, because I feel like that story went in really good ways, but I don't know. I mean, if you could bring that back in a way that would work, cool. But I'd be curious to see, Jane investigating another crime in a different circumstance.
Yeah, and Jane, I don't dig into her background, and she's slightly. I have 4 points of view in the book, and 3 of them are first person, and Jane is not. And I wish I had some really, really clever answer as to why I did it that way. She began as performing a role because the crime is on Halloween, and then we back up to May 13th and we go forward to Halloween that way. But every once in a while we jump to post-Halloween and the investigation, so we can show how the investigation relates to what actually happened. And that's where Jane comes in the future, post Halloween. And initially I thought that was just going to be the role. And then I realized how interesting she was and could be. And she got more and more developed, but I don't dig into her backstory. And so I haven't hemmed myself in. One of the problems with repeating characters is first of all, if you crash and burn them, it's hard to bring them back up again. But also if part of the mystery is their background, well, now their background is known and it's hard to recreate that mystery. It's always fun when you're writing these novels, especially kind of a psychological, domestic thriller like this, to have the backgrounds be part of the suspense, part of them. And once you've revealed that in a previous book, it makes it a little more challenging. So who knows, maybe I can make it work.
So there is another point of view that we haven't really talked about. And that's an interesting one too, because, when you say that some people say, I don't think I can really talk about the plot of the book, I feel like if you talk about any point of the plot and who these characters are, it's just going to be too much of a spoiler. But
you're totally right. I mean, people ask me, what's your elevator pitch? And Jessica, that's always the thing. Do you have an elevator pitch for your book? And I'm like, I can tell you what the premise appears to be at the beginning, but it's not what's going to be true. So, what do you want me to tell you? Everything I tell you is going to be only partly true or maybe completely wrong, unless I'm going to spoil it for you. And so you're right. And that's why I think a lot of reviewers have said, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Just go in and read it blind. That's probably the easiest. But yes, we have a character named Christian who is, I thought he was a very interesting character. I was worried he wouldn't be, that he would be kind of a stereotype. And I really don't feel like it turned out that way. I think he, and we get to, even if he's a kind of guy who you've seen before in a novel, and I think he probably is, I think he's different than most people you see. And I think we do see a human side of him. And I think we see him maybe becoming more vulnerable than he had thought he would. And I think that's interesting. You've got people who are being deceptive with one another, right? I mean, that's this whole book. And, if you've got somebody who makes a living being a con artist or some kind of a deceptive person, it's sort of interesting when you start seeing tables being turned and not just Christian, but just generally in the book. That's one of the fun things about it, is to play with people's expectations, maybe to make them think they are reading a stereotype and then, wait a second, it wasn't what I thought. And that's part of what I'm thinking the reader is thinking. I mean, I'm always thinking, how is the reader seeing this? How can I switch it up on them?
Well, this was a real fun read and a real fun interview. Thank you so much for talking around this book, because that's like I said, and you said it too, you really do have to go in just blind and read the blurb and just know you're going to be very surprised by the things that happen in it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the goal. And that's my problem with marketing, is I can't describe the book to anybody, but I can promise you that there will be lots of twists. I can all but guarantee you will not see where this is going. You will be surprised. If I'll say to anybody who's going to read it, if you figured it out, please email me or call me, get to me through my website, which is just davidellis.com, and let me know how you figured it out, because I'd love to know.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us. This was Jessikah with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast, and our guest today was
David Ellis.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.